removal of food through esophagus. After the mastication in the mouth, when it enters the pharynx and pharynx to the esophagus, and how the food can be passed through the esophagus, and also what happens, the structure of the esophagus, and while passing the food, what reactions are taken place in the esophagus. We just go through the flow chart here. Here it is the esophagus. Esophagus can be what functions? Here it is. So walls secrete mucus, slimy substance. When we observe the inner walls of the esophagus, it is lined with mucous membrane. The mucous membrane can secrete a substance called mucin. The mucin make the inner lining of the esophagus to be slimy. Means it reduces the friction and it can allow the easy passage of the food materials to pass through. Right? And later it is here, it's a long tube. The structure is showing here. What kind of a structure the esophagus is? See that the esophagus is a long tube-like structure, and one end is connected to the pharynx. It's a tube-like structure. It is one end. The top end is connected to the pharynx. Is the where it was started. It is the initial part of the esophagus. Later, the another important thing is the lower part. The upper part of the esophagus is connected to the pharynx, whereas the lower part or lower end is connected to the stomach. Lower end is connected to the stomach. So esophagus is a tube-like muscular structure provided by mucous membrane. The one end started with pharynx and another end ends with stomach. In other words, we can say esophagus is a tube-like structure which are connecting the pharynx to the stomach, or connection between the pharynx and stomach. Now coming here, what the function of the esophagus particularly? The esophagus pass the food to stomach. When the food enters the pharynx, then the food can pass through the esophagus and enter the stomach. So the esophagus can pass the food materials to stomach. And how the food can pass to the stomach while the food is passing through the esophagus, and how the food can be passing through the esophagus? We see that it's a wave-like movement. Esophagus, when the food is passing through the esophagus, the food is passing in a specific rhythmical movement. That wave-like motion is happening while the food is passing through the esophagus. That wave-like movement of the food passing through the esophagus is called peristaltic movement. Peristaltic movement or peristalsis. Right? So why? Because the esophagus is the structure made up of the two types of muscles, the circular and parallel muscles. Those circular and parallel muscles are contract and relax rhythmically. That can make the food materials to pass easily to the next or maybe forward direction. That rhythmical movement of both the muscles make the food materials to be falling to the forward direction. That movement is called a wave-like movement, generally called peristaltic. And what kind of a structure is it and how it will be? The esophagus is made up of muscle. It's a muscular structure. It's a tube which is made up of a muscle, so it is called muscular structure. And the muscles are elastic in nature. Elastic, they can expand and they can reduce. Generally, the characteristic feature of the muscle is it can be contracted and can be relaxed. Right? So this is the basic characteristic feature of a muscle. That's generally called as it's an elastic nature. Means like a rubber band itself. It can be elaborated, it can be reducing or coming back to the normal. That's called the structural position of the esophagus. Later, here the walls carry on wave-like movement by contraction and relaxation. Here in the beginning we said that while food is passing through the esophagus, they are showing a wave-like movement. How the wave-like movement happens while food is passing through the esophagus? Because the muscles are moving contractions and relaxations. Contraction and relaxation. When muscles of the esophagus are rhythmically contracting and relaxing, it causes a rhythmical movement while food is passing through the esophagus. That is called peristaltic movement or peristalsis. This is what the travel of food, when food is traveling through the esophagus, and these are the things may happen.